Self-advocacy. What does that look like? Absent of what it may appear on the outside, I haven't been a very good self-advocate. Not at all. If you think back on it, back in 2010, I actually became homeless because I wasn't a good self-advocate. Now, that being said, I also made a choice that I wanted to travel, and I didn't want to spend 90% of my income for shelter. But at some point in time during those 7.5 years, there were many periods of time during those 7.5 years, I would have loved to have shelter. I would have, if I would have been found eligible for low-income housing that I could afford, there's a possibility that I could have traveled as well as had a stable residence. I don't know. I don't know what that would have looked like because I wasn't good at being a self-advocate. A good example of this is that I've been on and off a waiting list for a Section 8 voucher for years. Literally, maybe 15 years. And that's going back before my first divorce. I didn't leave my husband actually as we had planned when our last child left the nest, because I had nowhere to go. Even though I had my Social Security, I had no way to leave. Even though emotionally it was not a good situation for me, or actually for him. And that being said, there's a lot that I would have done differently. But when we divorced, when I finally left, there was a lot of good reasons that I should have left a long time ago. I stayed as a caregiver for him, and I didn't even realize that back then. And I didn't feel guilty. Well, I want to take that back because I did feel guilty. I mean, I can remember while living with my friend going back to my soon-to-be ex-husband's and making him a sandwich so that he would eat. He didn't have the capability or the executive function just to get up and make himself a sandwich. And I didn't understand anything about disability back then. I really, really didn't. But when it all came down to it, we were caregivers for one another without even realizing it. And we had evolved into that situation after maybe very, very soon into our marriage. Very soon into our marriage, we had evolved into the situation of being co-caregivers. Me more than him. He really kind of tried to ignore the fact that I needed caregiving. So it was more my children who caregave me. And in order to get out of a position of needing caregiving, I ran, if you will. I ran away. I tried to run away from my own body, and I was not successful. You can hear the dogs in the background drinking. I wasn't successful at running away from my disabilities. I wasn't successful at running away from my dysfunction or my absence of function. And now, after 7.5 years being homeless, back in September of 2017, I finally decided to give up 80% of my income for housing. And that has been non-sustainable. It's just not sustainable. When COVID hit, yeah, my income didn't go down, but my expenses went up tremendously. And I'm trying to figure out how exactly that happened. Every day I will sit there with a spreadsheet trying to figure out how I went from 0 to X. I have managed businesses with budgets much larger than I've ever imagined having myself. Managing money isn't the issue. The issue is executive functioning. And the issue is dissociation and the fact that I timeshare my brain and body with over 100 personalities. And guess what? They each have their idea of what a budget should be. And some of them don't understand that I have an extremely low income. So this week, all of that being said, this week was kind of monumentous for self-advocacy. It started out on Monday with my therapist, and I requested some help with my executive functioning. And then I followed that up with Tuesday, reiterating that request to my physician. Both of them had their hands tied partially because of the fact that I go to a therapist and a physician who neither of which has a social worker on staff. So they have to reach outside of their normal, their regular structure to access this referral. But it's something that both of them that should not only know how to do, but by me asking for this, then the next person down the line who needs it, hopefully I've made this path a little bit easier for them. So this podcast is going on a little. Hi, this is Maggie Slighte from Slightly Maggie, the podcast. Yes, it's been a couple of days now, but something that I haven't talked about on here yet is that I have a mental injury that is called complex PTSD, and I have a mental illness which is known as dissociative identity disorder. Now that sounds like a big mouthful, especially when I don't have my teeth in, right? But dissociative identity disorder is previously been known as multiple personality disorder. And when I was a kid, they thought it was extremely rare, and very exploitative movies like Sybil came out, and that hurt the multiple community quite a bit. And in my generation, they have movies like Split, which also hurt the multiple community quite a bit. However, so I'm going to digress for a minute here and say, if you want to enjoy Steven Spielberg's take on dissociative identity disorder, I will say that United States of Terror is, yes, it's exaggerated, but it does explore some of the funnier parts as well as some of the more disturbing parts of having this illness. And it is a riot. A lot of us with dissociative identity disorder, or D.I.D. as it's referred to, are able to laugh at that particular show. But even within that paradigm of that show, there's a reference to violent acts by people with dissociative identity disorder. And I can tell you that most of the people that I know with the disorder, the only time that they have been violent has been to themselves. Maybe during a temper tantrum, or what could be perceived as a temper tantrum if it was in a smaller human being. But you have to think of when you have an identity that's, say, 2 years old in a body that's, say, 30 years old, it doesn't come across appropriate. It doesn't come across Anyway, I've even had shame hurled at me by members of the medical community for a condition that I don't have control over. So that's something that I deal with. And the reason why I bring up my mental disability is that this last week I was struggling. I've been struggling for about a week and a half now. Not really what I would call, quote unquote, here. I'm not here. I haven't been here. I haven't been able to do those things mentally that I have obliged myself to doing. I have acted out towards friends who love me and on social media. And it hasn't been pleasant to be on this side of it either. So just a little bit of an insight. I have a blog that's not been written in for a while, but it gives you a few clues to this disorder, and the URL for that is mymesblog.com or mymesblog.com. So I'll put the link in the description of this particular episode, if you will. But know that I'm here. Know that I have a lot of plans in the works. But here's the thing. If you're somebody who's connected to me and you've thought about getting involved in something that I'm involved in, or offering your services, or volunteering to help, please do, because I've been overwhelmed. I've been incredibly overwhelmed. I have some things that I'm starting and some things that may even be lucrative after a fashion. But no matter what I'm involved in, I can always use some help, and together we can make miracles happen. I just want to leave that out there with you guys. I want you to have a great day. We have a weekend coming up. I want you to have a fantastic weekend. Love and light from Maggie Slighte. Peace out.